Hello. Oh, I suddenly look much closer to the screen than I did before this call started. I mean, this broadcast, of course. There we are. Hi. How is everybody? We are here on all kinds of media. This is The Gathering Room, which is now, I don't even understand it. It's on Instagram. It's on Facebook. There's a GarageBand thing involved. I'm in so deeply over my head. All I'm really going to do is like blink in Morse code. Help me. I'm in a technological fortress I cannot escape. Hi, everybody. I'm Martha Beck, and you're in The Gathering Room, and I love having you here. And look here. This is where I've been sitting to do interviews because I have a book coming out. It's called The Way of Integrity. And can you see it? Instagram people can't really see it. Anyway, I've worked on this book was a long time coming. I worked on it for like 5 years, and I'm really quite pleased with it, if I do say so myself, and I've never said that about a book before. Anyway, it's coming out on April 13th, and I want to invite you all to come to hang out with me and Liz Gilbert on that day. I think we'll be on Facebook, right? We're having... No. Oh, you have to buy tickets, but they're not very expensive. And you get a book, and it's wondrous. So you can come to sort of our book club, and it'll be super fun because I wrote the book during the, leading up to the COVID lockdown, and during the lockdown, Liz, of course, wrote like 12 books, some of which she may publish or not. Anyway, she read me a novel that she'd written. We'd call each other, and I read her The Way of Integrity in several drafts. So it's going to be really fun to launch the book with Liz, and I think we want you all there. It would be so much fun. So please come along. And now for today's topic, which, oh my gosh, you guys, I am so excited. At the end of last week's call, someone said to me, "What are you reading these days?" And I was like, oh my God, I'm reading this book by a guy who was the FBI's top hostage negotiator. His name is Chris Voss, and it's all about how to negotiate. Negotiate as if your life depended on it. The title is Never Split the Difference, if you want to get the book. You guys, I've read psychology books my whole life, and I know The Gathering Room was meant to be sort of a spiritual thing, but for me, psychology and spirituality, they munge together. Because how can you have a psyche? Psyche means soul in Greek. So how could you have a psychological self without a soul self too? So they all munge together. And it's very rare for me to read a psychology book that teaches me to do something that I've desperately needed to do often, but I've never heard anyone explain it before. And to have it laid out really clearly, oh my gosh. So the reason I want to talk to you guys about it is that from, our conversations, I see your comments, we go back and forth. I get to sort of like, I see you, even though you don't talk back to me in this forum, except through the chat and the texting and whatnot. But I figure, and I think I'm right, that most of us here, and I will own this fully, are kind of raging codependents. And what that means is we're here to help. There used to be a cartoon cat who was super codependent, and his whole, I forget what his name was, but his whole motto was, it never hurts to help. And then he would go try to help someone and invariably get very badly hurt, either directly by the person or by the situation. Anyway, that's codependency. People who are addicted to drugs are dependent. People who are trying to help the people who are addicted to drugs or to insanity in any form, we're the codependents of the world. And it's great, makes you a very caring person, except it can burn you out. It has all the disadvantages of addiction without the fun of getting high or drunk or whatever. So it just sort of drags you down, and it's kind of dismal. But your prognosis for getting well is very, very high because you take responsibility for all your actions, which a lot of addicts, between the chemicals and a mindset, they don't do that. So I always assume I'm talking to a bunch of codependent people like myself, and I mean that as a compliment. And all my self-help is written to us. But here's the thing, and I wrote about it in a book once called Steering by Starlight. I wrote about there are three psychiatric diagnoses that are known as the dark triad. And the diagnoses, if you look at the DSM-5, are narcissistic personality disorder, Machiavellian personality disorder, and psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. Those are the people, they're like serial murderers and whatnot. Now, this category of people is very puzzling. And whenever I write self-help about it, in Steering by Starlight, I called it, borrowing from Harry Potter, Defense Against the Dark Arts. And all I was talking about was being able to pick up when you've got someone with one of these diagnoses in the room, because they're fundamentally thinking differently than you are. Another great psychology book by a PhD at Harvard named Martha Stout. She wrote a book called The Sociopath Next Door. And it was about how sociopaths are born without a conscience, the way a blind person, someone born blind is born without sight. There's no conscience at work. And so she tells all these stories about how psychopaths work. And I'll give you an example that's not from her book. It's from, I heard that this was a question that the FBI used to identify psychopaths. And here's the story. A woman goes to her mother's funeral. And while she's there, she meets this man, and they really hit it off. Like, they just mesh, and the sparks are flying. But she doesn't know him, and in all the commotion, he gets away, and she doesn't know who he was. The next week, she kills her sister. Why? And most people will go, like, I can see people going, I don't know. And some people say, well, she's jealous of the sister. Maybe the sister was interested in the man. These are all sort of normal human rationalizations. And the answer, a psychopath or a sociopath, which is almost exactly the same, and the answer they give immediately is, well, if he came to the first funeral, he'll come to the next one, and she can get his name. So for a psychopath or a sociopath, killing your sister is the equivalent of Googling someone's phone number. Like, it has no emotional resonance at all. There's no empathy. So in narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, there's no empathy. And what Martha Stout says, and I've read this in other places, is if you are dealing with a psychopath and you figure it out, then they lie flawlessly. They're the only people who can lie without changing their heart rate or anything, so they can pass lie detector tests and everything. But she said, if you realize that the biggest sign you're in a relationship with a psychopath is that you feel pity consistently for someone who's doing things that harm other people, because psychopaths actually like to be pitied, and no other type of person outside the dark triad enjoys being pitied. She said, so anyway, if you figure this out through circumstances or whatever, just get out. It's like a plane crash. You couldn't see it coming. Don't take anything with you. Just get out and be glad you're alive. And there's nothing you can do. So that's what I've basically been telling people, look for these sort of subtle tells that'll say if there's someone like that in the room, and then just get away. But Chris Voss, back to him, the hostage negotiator, he's been dealing his whole career with people like terrorists who behead their hostages and things, like really serious psychopaths. And then at lower levels with people who are just nefarious and calculating in business and whatever. But he's done and his ability to understand how to cope with this was so exciting to me that I feel right now, after reading his book 3 times, I actually feel safer than I've felt in the world for a very long time. Another great book, Gary DeBecker's The Gift of Fear. Similar, just lays out some stuff that we need laid out. Okay, so I wanted to tell you guys, it's an update on Defense Against the Dark Arts. And when I called this How to Handle Problem Relationships, I meant real problems. Now, for those of you who are going, well, I don't think my loved one is a psychopath or my boss or whatever, just know that if somebody's in an addictive scenario, no matter what their addiction, it could be gambling as well as drugs or alcohol or whatever, gambling does something to the brain that basically addiction turns off those empathy circuits. And so a person who's in the throes of an addiction behaves like someone in the dark triad. So if you're with someone who's in an addictive pattern, and that's very common, They estimate 1 out of every 25 people is born a psychopath. And you know why? Because as bands of humans were separated when it was more sparsely populated, there was a lot of homicide. There was a lot of warfare between small groups. And so the groups needed people who could kill someone from another tribe at lunchtime and have no trouble having dinner and going to sleep. And that's what a psychopath can do. Other people have more trouble when they kill other people. So anyway, here's what I learned from Chris Voss. I just thought, I can't conceive of how a psychopath would think. This is what I've learned. There are 3 levels to the brain. Maybe you know this already. It's in a lot of my books. The lowest level is sometimes called the reptilian brain because it thinks like a lizard and it's just fight, flight, fight, flight. Or wrapped around that, so that's the brain stem, and then there's the reptilian brain. And then around that is the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. And your dog and your cat and maybe even your bird has that. So they think emotionally. Anyone who's ever owned an animal knows they have emotions, horses, everything. But they don't think cognitively the way we do. So on top of the limbic system, we've got a layer called the neocortex, where we use language and reason and mathematics and logic and bargaining and the things that we do with our brains. Now, here's what Chris Voss said that just changed. Well, he doesn't actually say this. This is my paraphrase of what I've learned from Chris Voss. When you're dealing with somebody who's crazy, and that could be an addict or someone from the dark triangle, the dark triad, you are not talking to a neocortex. This person will not respond to your reasoning, will not respond to your heartfelt requests, will not take your perspective, unable to do so, okay? And I just thought, well, then what are you left with? Try to be nice? Well, then you're going to get completely taken for a ride, and I speak from experience. So I just ran away. But what you are dealing with is you're dealing with a limbic system and a reptile brain. So just take out the whole rational part of a conversation and think of it as you face to face with a large Komodo dragon, like a human-sized lizard. Hello. And I got to tell you, I've worked with a couple of psychopaths as clients that I recognized were psychopaths sort of into the treatment for a while. And I can tell you I had the oddest sense that there was something reptilian about them. It was really weird. But here's the thing. Animals respond to sensory cues, and they respond to certain types of emotion. And this is what every psychopath will respond to. And Chris Voss boils it down to such simple steps. And he says there are 4 basic ways. I mean, he's a master and he takes it to a whole new level. But just as a beginner, there are 4 things you can do that will help you deal. It helps you talk a person who's in a dark triad into agreeing with you without knowing why they're agreeing with you, because it's not logical. It's so simple. First thing, use a low, soft voice. Speak slowly and end your sentences going down. He said, if you want to see the greatest negotiator voice in the world, watch Oprah Winfrey. She's so good. That's how she gets people to just tell her anything, right? She's so good at it. So that's the first thing, is a voice. And he said, if you can get playful, if they start to trust you, start smiling and say, oh, you know you want to do that. And that, what it does is it triggers the amygdala to start trusting you. It sounds manipulative, but it's not, because you're just talking in a low voice. You're not lying. The thing I love about Chris Voss is he's all about integrity. How you stay in your integrity while dealing with someone who has no conscience is fascinating. Second thing, always defer. So just starting everything you say with, I'm sorry, in a genuine voice, I'm sorry. What that does, it means that you're not going ego to ego, because if someone's arrogant and obnoxious, what wants to happen for you is you get a mirroring response that says, how dare you speak to me that way? I'll speak that way to you. You get mad at me, I'll get mad at you. And then it just escalates. Instead, you take the non-egoic perspective. Lao Tzu says all streams flow to the sea because it is lower than they are. Humility gives it its power. So all you have to do is say, I'm sorry. And then third thing, mirroring. You simply repeat 2 or 3 important words that sort of summarize what they just said. So you're the most selfish person I've ever known. Someone may shout at you and you say, I'm sorry, the most selfish person you've ever known? But you don't say it like, I'm sorry. You're just like, oh, I'm sorry. And what that does is it makes them feel like now they're in charge and they start to settle down. And then the last thing, and you just keep repeating that. And I know from mirroring as a technique in therapy that I use in coaching, that just mirroring someone is really powerful at making them feel heard. And that's another thing. He says you put full attention on the other person. You have no attention like on your own game. You're really focused on them in a genuine way. Integrity again. And I've learned that all it takes to get someone to feel really seen is if you just mirror. And it doesn't sound parrot-like. It seems like it will, but it doesn't. So you're a horrible person. You're the worst person I've ever known. I'm sorry, the worst person you've ever known? Yeah, you were bad to me. Oh, I'm sorry, bad to you? And you just do that, and maybe you paraphrase a little. And after a while, they start to run out of steam because their brain is now switching to feeling trust and to feeling domination. They feel like they're in charge. And then you do the last thing, which is another thing coaches do a lot, and it's perfectly in integrity. It makes people feel heard. You label their emotional position at the moment. You're so horrible and blah, 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 blah. Oh, it sounds as if you really feel hard done by. It sounds like you really feel like I've treated you badly. And you frame it as a question, and then they start to calm down almost magically. And he says you can use it on a 2-year-old. You can use it on a teenager because there's nothing deceitful about it. It's empathy in action. And the most interesting thing, I'm out of time now, I got to take some questions here, but the most fascinating thing about it is as he goes through story after story of dealing with psychopathic terrorists, it works at an amazing level. There's a story he tells about a guy he was a terrorist who liked to behead his hostages. And they used this technique on the guy, and he let an American hostage go. This was in the Philippines. And then he said, I don't know what you did. I fully intended to hurt him, and I just didn't do it. And I'm not sure why, but somebody over there deserves a promotion. So it's very interesting. It's very convincing. I haven't found a psychopath in my house to talk to. We're under lockdown, but I can't wait to get out and start re-encountering psychopaths in the real world so that I can try these techniques because I think they're really powerful and they're a way to use empathy as he says it's almost like a magic weapon so that people start to become more cooperative, more docile, more interested. And he says you get them, you convince them to do it your way, and they think they're doing it their way. So you they talk themselves into doing it your way, is the way he says it. And I'm excited about it. I love it. It's a new set of skills. So I see questions coming up thanks to somebody. I got a text earlier from someone that said, you okay? Because I shouted loudly, enjoy. So Alora says, do psychopaths know they're psychopaths? What an interesting question. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It often depends on their IQ level. Sometimes if they got a very low cognitive ability, they don't really ever twig to it. But I saw a fascinating documentary once where a psychologist was interviewing a guy who was an assassin for the mob. And he was like, I know I'm a psychopath and I don't know why. He's like, I can kill people. I can torture people to death while I'm eating a pizza. It's just no big deal. Can you help me understand it? He was in prison. Creepy as F, but also really fascinating. But he fully knew he was a psychopath and they can't stop it. And that's really unfortunate. I mean, maybe they can. I don't know. The problem is most of them don't want to. So, but yeah, they can know. So Donna says, is being a psychopath permanent or can they grow the skill of empathy? I'm going to hope that empathy can grow in. I mean, there are stories of people having massive breakthroughs But by and large, because anybody with a personality disorder, that is somebody who does not take responsibility for their own happiness or unhappiness, and the triad falls into that group. Anybody who doesn't think that they need to do something to feel better, they don't have a very high prognosis for cure, because each of us, now I'm going to get back into my cosmological view, each of us as a soul comes in saying, I'm going to figure this out, how to be in this human body. And if you drop the task of figuring it out and you say, that's not my job, someone else has to fix me, your odds of moving forward are very slim. So Margaret says, if they don't have that part, how do they pretend so well? They're unbelievably good mimics, and they're keen observers. Like, they'll be fascinated watching how people operate, and then they will just play with them like a cat plays with a mouse. One of the characters in Shakespeare, I once read that the character of Iago in Othello is a mistake Shakespeare made, because Iago causes Othello to murder his wife. He messes with people just because he has no motive, nothing to gain. And so this critic was saying nobody would do that. But Shakespeare, being Shakespeare, nailed the psychopathic personality. And Iago, through the whole play, is like watching people and playing with people. And this is often there will be a history of verbal abuse and even physical and sexual abuse, just as the person as a psychopath is testing his or her power. It's very, very creepy, as I said. It's like humanity at its worst. And I sometimes wonder if people choose at a soul level to come in as a psychopathic personality. I do not know. Big open question in my mind. But yeah, they're unbelievably good pretenders. Laura says, what creates empaths? Are empaths more likely to have fluid intelligence and experience moments of enlightenment? Oh, sorry. I think, you could say that empaths are born just like sociopaths are, But I do think that empaths learn by absorbing the stories of other people, learn to be more empathic, learn perspective taking, which is to be able to imagine the world from behind another person's eyes. And the more people you meet, the more your capacity to understand grows. And so, yes, much more fluid intelligence. Although somebody who's a psychopath who's really playing a game, who's got like 6 different lives running, they can have a lot of fluid intelligence as well. Their minds will be taken up by it a lot, and they'll spend a lot of time kind of staring into the middle distance, trying to figure out how to balance all the lies. Because I just wrote about integrity, right? So I did a lot of research on what lying does to people. Messes with our brains. And secret keeping is even worse than lying for the brain. So the brain does not like it, and probably gets somewhat fixated in there. Empaths can get fixated too on something that in Buddhism is called idiot compassion. And that is where you choose someone who has no goodwill toward anyone, and you decide to treat them like a poor victim of this or that. And a psychopath loves that. Oh my God. I had someone come in. He'd sexually abused his daughter for years and years, and he didn't lie about it. He was like quite out in the open. She was my client, and she brought him in. And it was fascinating to watch him. He was like, I think the real problem that we've had in our relationship is I haven't talked enough about myself. The daughter and I just looked at each other, and I was like, this is not, your dad's not going to grow empathy at this point. He's a psychopath. So she was able to deal with it that way and set boundaries on the relationship that were appropriate. And he eventually went to prison. Yay. Okay. So Jessica says, you're telling me that I can treat difficult people like I work with animals? Hallelujah. I can do that. It is exactly animal training. The thing is, for someone with cognition, if you and I are negotiating, we both have sound minds, and you say, I'm sorry, what is it you said you wanted again? Part of me is going to go, why are they being that way? But a psychopath, the tone of voice is so powerful because the neocortex really isn't in operation. So it is exactly like working with an animal. And it's actually like working with a reptile. So you've got the emotion, except for one thing. They love pride. Okay, so all three of these personality types and addicts are obsessed with their own esteem. Again, this is where the psychological and the spiritual crisscross, because in Asian religions or philosophies, this is called ego, the self-serving mind that cuts itself off from other beings and wants and grasps and hates. That's just pure ego. And to have their egos fed by a soothing tone of voice and the words, I'm sorry, and the reflection that says, you're the focus of my attention, that it's like they get hypnotized by it. It's really fascinating. And yeah, I love working with animals, and so do most empaths, so do most codependents. So I'm sure you all have lots of practice. Yay! Except for dogs. They're codependent too. You really can't base it on dogs. Okay, so Marianne says, if people know they're good at the dark arts, can they still be derailed in conversation that way? Yes, this is what blew me away about this book. They have a huge blind spot. They don't know how easy they are to manipulate. And because they're so like weird, like your mind just can't take it in, the last thing you want to do is say, oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that, when they're being crazy? But if you do that, they're like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. And they just get into it. I can't wait to try it, as I've said. I have to go I used to work with addicts, homeless addicts. I may have to go back and go to another methadone clinic and figure that out. Anyway, Allison said, is saying I'm sorry when you aren't submissive? It is, except that how many times you bump against someone on the subway, you say, I'm sorry. It's a way of taking responsibility for yourself in a social situation. Are you sorry? Are you deeply penitent? No. But you're using the phrase as a question. Like somebody says, the temperature today is, you might go, I'm sorry, could you say that again? It just means I didn't get it. I didn't get that. So it doesn't always mean you're in sackcloth and ashes. It just means you didn't understand and you want to understand. So grounded_enlightenment says, what's the difference between a psychopath and a narcissist? A psychopath really wants to be pitied, where a narcissist can't stand to be pitied, needs to be in power at all times, needs to display power, needs to be called the greatest, needs to have people shouting their name, needs to have constant praise, where a psychopath can be just fine as a sort of silent, maybe the butler, but he's managing, or they are managing the whole household without anyone knowing. So narcissists tend to be really out loud, where psychopaths may be out loud, but they may be very silent, and you'll only know that they're there when they start to hurt you and you pity them. Okay, Brian says, can you say more about the tells? How do we spot the pitying, and what other tells are there? Okay, so this is great. I've had so many people who had psychopathic parents, because they tend to seek some kind of counseling. And they'll start talking about a parent who is clearly without empathy. And I'll say, I think your parent may fit into this diagnosis. Don't want to label everything, but it might help. And they say, oh no, she or he couldn't possibly be a psychopath. Let's say it's a woman. She cries all the time. She's so tenderhearted. And it's even more actually when it's a man. I've had women tell me, oh, my abusive husband or my father, they're so tenderhearted. They cry all the time, they're so soft and easily wounded. And people disrespect them, and it just makes them cry. And then you say, has he ever cried for you? In fact, have you ever seen him cry for anyone except himself? Have you ever seen him seem tenderhearted in someone else's perspective? And they'll go, nobody cries all the time. And so they end up pitying and caring for the psychopath. So and then there's one other thing, and it's what I call slippage. They start telling you things. Like I once had a business associate who kept telling me, I got this check for you, I'm sending it on, and then nothing would happen. And I'd email her and I'd say, you said the check was in the mail. And she'd go, oh yeah, I am so sorry, I don't know what happened. When I say the check's in the mail, the check's in the mail. A year later, I finally had to call the person who was employing me and find out that they'd been paying this person all along and she'd been lying to me. But I felt this slippage, like the facts weren't all working together. And that's actually what I wrote about in the path of integrity, or the way of integrity, because it's about nothing feeling slippery. When you're in pure integrity, everything goes click. And let me tell you something, the more pure your own integrity, the faster you pick up a psychopath. It gets really, really easy because the energy is so different. But if you're lying at all about anything, you're in that same slippery energy. So once you get really in integrity, the world becomes a much safer place. Great question, Brian. Okay, a couple more. I'll just keep going because I'm excited. Jessica says, in relationships where a loved one doesn't have a psychological disorder, I have a hard time apologizing when I'm not. I am sorry that they're upset. Are you experimenting with these skills in ordinary relationship disagreements? Yes, and here's the reason why. If someone reasonable is yelling, is shouting, is doing something unfair that we perceive as unfair, by far the most likely thing, and you know this person's not a psychopath or a narcissist, if they're responding out of proportion to what you think they should, you've probably triggered something that is stored in them as an experience of trauma. It could be horrible trauma, or it could just be a really painful emotional relationship, usually early in life. And what happens is, like I knew someone whose parents used to say, we're not angry, we're disappointed. Anyone who used the word disappointed around this guy, he would explode. And people were like, I was just disappointed that, they're not renewing my show. And he'd be like, rah! Now, if they do that, they're not actually in their right minds. They're replaying a trauma. And they are in that limbic system, fight or flight. Ah! The neocortex is not functioning. And so you use the same thing. Gentle, soft, slow. I'm sorry. You seem really upset. You mirror, you label, and you bring it down, And again, it's not, I'm sorry as in I did something wrong, but it's, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And it brings them out of that raging limbic system, reptilian brain, and then they can come online and start to trust you. And then you can get rapport and empathy. There's so much great stuff in Chris Voss's book about this. And it works like magic when people are traumatized as well as when they're just plain crazy. Okay, last question for this week. How is secret keeping bad for the brain? Please say more about this. Well, you have to invent reality. This is what my whole book is about. If you're not telling the truth, then what's coming out of your mouth is something you had to make up. I got a secret for you. And I'm not going to keep it. Reality is extremely complex. It is more complex than your brain. Like, no matter how fabulous the human brain is, the universe is more complicated than anything you can make up. So if you're in harmony with reality and you're telling the truth as you see it and learning more and being more and more truthful, everything supports you. You don't have to invent anything up here. You're free to enjoy, to imagine, to love, to create. And the more you spend your time prevaricating, telling lies, keeping secrets, the more time you have to spend altering reality so you can spin things correctly for the people around you. You're trying to act like a psychopath when you're not, and it's really hard. So all of this, I'm sorry, I'm just so excited about this topic this week. And I am so grateful to you for coming and joining me and hanging out here. And I hope that you have somebody in your life you can practice on, because suddenly once you know this stuff, it's no longer a burden. It's an opportunity. And that's how life is a win-win situation. So I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. Mwah, 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 mwah. See you again next week on The Gathering Room.